Have you achieved success and a high income, but still lack personal fulfillment and work-life balance? You're in the right place. Welcome to the Successful But Struggling podcast. Join us as Erin, Eunicia, Joanne, and Mim share transformative insights and practical strategies just for you. Discover real stories and lessons that will elevate your personal satisfaction, professional accomplishment, and financial empowerment.
Have you ever had changes in your mood around this time of year and wondered what's this all about? In this episode, I get the opportunity to interview our own Dr. Joanne Sotelo, psychiatrist and physician coach, and she's going to help us understand some of the things behind it and what we can do about it. Joanne, I'm so glad to see you today and happy that we can talk about this topic that may cause some of us to be a little confused with what is going on with my mood.
Thank you so much for the introduction. And yes, during the time of this recording is mid-October, and this is a time of the year that the seasons change. Then, especially if you're in northern colder climates, you start feeling it more. The days get shorter, and there are so many things that can contribute to what you might identify as the winter blues or the holiday blues, or if it gets a little bit worse, then it could be a more symptomatic, more serious illness that it's called seasonal affective disorder. So you mentioned some of the things. Part of it is that the days are shorter. So we are solar, like I say. So we're fueled by the sun. So as the days get shorter, that's one of the reasons why our mood can change, our sleep can change. And then there's also all the external stressors and this time of the year with holidays and the new year and all those things that we've talked about. All of those can contribute to changes in your mood. And I do want to clarify that it's not uncommon for people to feel a slight lowering in their energy, a little bit of a sleep disturbance, maybe a little bit more anxiety. And that's not uncommon. And it doesn't mean that there's anything wrong. And if it gets worse, then that's when we have to pay a little bit more attention. And I can tell you with a little bit of a psychiatry hat on, this is meant for education and not a substitution for any kind of medical advice, but as information. What we call seasonal affective disorder, it is very similar to depression or major depressive disorder. There might be a few changes, but you still have your low mood. Again, usually changes in sleep show more as sleeping more or a sleep that's more interrupted and not restful. Your energy is low. You're not as motivated to do the things that you usually enjoy. And there can even be a sense of hopelessness. To that, some people also feel more anxiety, more irritability. That's more common for the seasonal affective disorder that's related to the winter months. And I gave you there some details with my psychiatry hat on for a minute.
I would love to hear more about this, Joanne, because I live in the Northwest. A lot of people struggle with the number of overcast days, and especially as we enter into the winter season. And sometimes things can be sneaky and they sneak up on us so slowly, we may not even be aware that there's been changes. I'm wondering, how quickly does the seasonal affective disorder or associated symptoms tend to arise? And or is it something that tends to be more abrupt and easy to notice?
Good question. It is usually subtle, and you can think back and ask yourself, how do I usually do during this time of the year? And maybe there wasn't necessarily a mood change, but you remember not wanting to get out as much. You might have a good workout routine and you stop that. You might have your routine of when you go to bed and that just doesn't happen. You might not want to participate in family events or even house chores. So think back and check in with yourself because it's kind of subtle, and you're right, it's sneaky, because it usually starts with lowering in your energy and lowering motivation before you start noticing change in mood. It's rare that it starts with, oh, I'm feeling sad. I wonder if it's the time of the year. And when we tend to fight that, especially as professional women or women in medicine, we tend to be like, no, 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 I'm just, overworked. I can just fight through. And we do ignore it. So it's a really good question because, again, it's that awareness that we talk so much about of wondering what's going on.
And it sounds like it can be confused with, oh, I'm post call or I'm tired from something else because it can be so subtle. And I always like to ask, why is this so important for female physicians to be aware of it? And are there ways that we might be affected that look a little differently or feel a little differently so that we can be more aware if this is something that we're struggling with?
Yes. And it's beyond the awareness and the curiosity that we always talk about, because early recognition can make a huge difference. Because if we target it early, if we start taking care of ourselves early, we can keep it from getting worse. So it's very important to not ignore it. And on top of that, like we talked so much in this podcast, as women physicians, we are already at a higher risk of depression and anxiety and burnout. So we might have been struggling with some of that sense of overwhelm, exhaustion, kind of disinterest, isolation already. So it's very, very important. There's something that I'm thinking of, actually, Erin, you've talked about this too, that so many of us tend to isolate, and we isolate and disconnect even more when we're not feeling well. So that's the other good reason why we need to be aware, because we need to do the opposite. We need to connect more. We need to, and it's not like being super social, right? Like, it's not, don't push yourself necessarily like that, but talking with a friend, talking with a colleague, checking in with each other, all of that can be very helpful. And then other things that we always talk about, because they always get in the way of the sense of guilt, perfectionism, like all the double standards. And it's very, very important. We've talked about it in here, the overall mental health awareness and the stigma that we carry, probably a little bit more so than the general population.
So I heard you talking about, we're talking a lot about seasonal affective disorder or the winter blues and being aware of it. And it can be kind of sneaky and sneak up on us, sometimes hard to differentiate between what else is going on in our lives. Also, some things that can make it better is being aware, and things that can make it worse is isolating ourselves. And I'm just wondering, when we do have an awareness, hey, this might be going on, are there some easy ways to double check, like how to tell the difference between seasonal affective disorder and something that's more serious or less serious, like a questionnaire or an easy check in? Or is that something a primary care doctor might be familiar with?
Yes, good questions. So the first thing is to acknowledge your feelings. So checking in, how am I feeling? And most of us can tell, oh, I'm tired because I'm post call, or I've had multiple difficult patients, or my kid was sick. But we usually kind of bounce back after a couple of days, or good night's sleep, a break, weekend, we can usually start to feel better. So I usually say, if the energy doesn't bounce back even after a couple of days off or sleeping better, if your mood is low consistently, where you don't even want to do the things that you normally do, when you're prompted, you can tell then, I should be having more fun and I'm not, or I should be more interactive with my family and I'm not. At that point, I would start considering that it's a little bit more serious. And to answer your specific question, yes, you can always check in with your primary care physician. There is a scale that you can look for. It's called PHQ-2 or PHQ-9. That's kind of the gold standard that we use to screen for overall symptoms of depression that can help you. And I would never tell anyone self-diagnose and self-treat, right? Like sometimes, right, especially as physicians, but it's a good way to check in. And like I've said before, even if you ask yourself, how am I feeling? And do that several days in a row. And then check in with the other questions of how am I sleeping? How's my energy? How's my motivation? You will see a pattern even after just a couple of days. So that's a really good way to screen and pay attention, be a little bit more alert of where you're really at.
And that brings up a good point when you talk about pattern recognition. I believe that we as women physicians are great at seeing pattern recognitions in others,
Hmm.
in our patients, maybe in our colleagues. Sometimes I think we're a little oblivious to patterns in ourselves. And I'm wondering, even, are we pausing long enough to go, oh, this is the same way I felt last November? Oh, yeah, there is this pattern, versus so much of the time I feel like we're just running from one thing to the next without necessarily taking that time to pause and reflect, to even recognize those patterns in ourselves. And it makes me wonder, um, would checking in with a girlfriend or a colleague, or even can we be that little bit of a radar looking out for each other when we're noticing something going on with a friend or a colleague who's a physician? That's
Yes,
a lot of questions thrown
100%.
at you.
100%. Yes. The suffering in silence is never the right answer. We have to connect. We have to say how we're feeling. We have to ask for help if needed.
And do you find, as a psychiatrist, who you always say you are not seeing enough physicians, the number that should be seeing you, but in the number that do see you, or in the ones that you work with as their coach, and you recognize these things, how often do you think people are actually aware of these patterns that are going on with them versus being maybe completely oblivious or chalking it up to something else?
It's such a good question. When we start talking about it, then they go, oh, wow, yes, this time of the year is usually rough for me. But to be honest, I've had to bring it up and without judgment, kind of matter of fact of let's talk about how we want to finish this year with the compassion that towards the end of the year you might have these added stressors that are somewhat physiological as well. And and a few of them have said yes, and even some can even talk about actually, and my mood changes and I've had to check in with my doctor, or I've seen a psychiatrist in the past. So having that honesty and vulnerability with yourselves, that it can be more challenging this time of the year.
And so maybe a wake up call for us as physicians to remember to pause and check in and go, how, no, really, how am I doing? Or if you don't have a clear answer, maybe checking with those around you. We've talked a little bit about when you interact early, you can have better outcomes. I would love to hear more about when we're having some mood changes around this time of year. What are the things that we can do to improve our circumstances?
This is unpopular answer. I get so much the question, Joanne, you're a psychiatrist and you're also a coach. How can you help us? And I'll say, we have to get back to the basics and we have to prioritize self care more than ever, because taking care of our well being can make a huge difference, especially this time of the year, in terms of our mood and how we show up. So, things like having a really good nighttime routine so that we protect our sleep, having some physical movement can help a lot in terms also of our mood and our sleep. Eating well, staying hydrated, and then as a bonus, especially this time of the year, getting exposure to light, especially early in the morning, can be amazing. And for some people, you might need to have actually light therapy. And I don't know all the details, but it's, well, I don't remember the numbers, but it's a very specific light that you can buy, especially if you're in a place that it's very dark most of the day. And exposure to it 10-15 minutes a day can make a big difference. And this has been shown in multiple research. You don't always necessarily need an antidepressant. But for the rest of the people, just going outside for 10 or 15 minutes, especially early in the morning without sunglasses, because a lot of it gets absorbed through the eyes, can be amazing. Then, if you want supplements, and again, this is information, always check in with your physician. Supplements like vitamin D, as in day, to take during the day can be very helpful. And then magnesium at night can be very helpful as well. So these are similar than the things that make sense for us throughout the year. But in this time of the year when the days are shorter, where our energy is lower, where our mood can change, we're not sleeping as well, we have to control what we can control. And we can take accountability for our self care in this way.
I'm going to ask you to put your coaching hat on now, Dr. Joanne, because oftentimes, and I find this as a coach myself, there's resistance to the exact things that you know you need to be doing. I'll exercise when my energy goes up, but actually, your energy may not go up until you get the exercise. I'll go outside and get some sunshine when I feel better. I don't feel like getting out of bed. And so I wonder, with your coaching perspective, when we have that mindset or we're exhausted and we just don't know how to even get beyond that resistance, how can we get in motion to make a start in the direction that we need to in order to get some of those outcomes that you're talking about, which are really not that extraordinary, are really not that um, difficult. And yet, even though they're simple, doesn't mean that it's easy.
Yes, you grabbed my words out of my mouth. And what a great question. I have so many ideas. So, there's a misconception that in order for us to start something, we need to wait for motivation. And I usually say motivation is like this pixie dust that if you're lucky, you get a little bit of it every now and then you want to do the thing. That's not common. And we have to think of the things that we want. We do what we prioritize. And yes, this sounds just challenging, but again, we have to control the things that we can control. And if we know that working out, and by working out, it could be a 10-minute stretch or a 5-minute walk. If we know that that's going to help us, it's our responsibility to do it. But like you said, that doesn't mean that it's easy. And we have to think about it in terms of this is important. I am going to set it as a priority and I'm going to save time for it. You can also approach it as what is the emotion that can drive me? And try not to make it about super motivated, super excited, because those are difficult to get and keep. So maybe think of I am determined. So, what thought can you have that can make you feel determined that will get you to do the thing that you want to do? And having a thought as this is important to me, I want to feel better. Walking outside for 5 minutes will help me feel better. That kind of feeds that sense of determination and can get you going. So, it's trying out different thoughts that you can have that will drive the emotion that will drive to the desired action. And it's whatever fits you. And I always think of how do I want to show up? Who do I need to be to do this? And try different questions like that and see which one inspires you to take action. And then the magic is that once you get it going, then it gets a little bit easier, but 100% hard at the beginning. And I say that too. I work out pretty regularly, and I can say that I like to work out. I work out in the morning. I rarely wake up saying, "Yes, I cannot wait to get out of bed and go work out." Very, very rarely. I usually have a discussion with the pillow. Like, do I stay? Do I go? But I've set it up in a way that I have more things that get me to work out than keep me in bed. And sometimes I do stay in bed and sleep more. Again, this is a long answer. And this is the work of coaching. This is why it's so important to have someone helping you through this, because our brain is so sneaky, and our brain will go, "You are older. You need to sleep more. Didn't you hear the psychiatrist saying that sleeping well is important for this time of the year? Let's just stay in bed." And it's perfectly fine answer. You're not saying anything that's not true. And then we can also say, yes, and maybe twice a week, I am actually going to get out of bed and move for 10 minutes. And kind of negotiate with yourself in a way that drives you. Try different things out and see what works.
I was on a call earlier today and running some folks through a mini coaching session. And one of the statements I use is making rules when you're feeling strong at your good time of the day, and then follow the rules. So if your rule is every weekday I get up at 6 a.m. to go do my workout, or every day after I get up and before I get dressed, I'm going to go sit out on my porch and get some sunshine. And then even when you don't feel like it, is you made the rule, follow the rule, and then just stick by your rules is something that I've found somewhat helpful when I'm finding that internal resistance. And then, as you said, I love that as a coach, shifting the mindset. What's that thought that's going to get you to doing the actions that we need, instead of allowing whatever thought pops into our head, asking, is this thought serving me? Or do I need to come up with something else, as you were saying, to get out of bed and get that workout in?
And something else related to that is also, if you try all these tools and they don't work, maybe you need to reset the expectations. Maybe what you're asking of yourself is not something that you're ready for, even if you've done it before. So if you're saying, I'm going to go work out for an hour, and you haven't been able to keep that promise to yourself, then maybe say, well, I'll just go walk for 20 minutes, or I'll stretch. Or if you keep on thinking that you're going to do this very drastic diet and you're not following through, then say, let me just add a few vegetables, and make it mean that you are keeping the promise to yourself, because that's what's going to build the trust and what's going to build your momentum to keep on moving forward.
I love that. So, we've been talking a lot about mood changes that can happen this time of year in the fall. And as we get close to winter time, we've talked about seasonal affective disorder, what it is and how it can sneak up on you and maybe not even notice your mood, but maybe your energy changes first. We've talked about being aware as women physicians of our own patterns, and actually what we can do about it. What you said is prioritizing your self-care, which we talk about a lot. Prioritizing your self-care and making sure that you are putting that number one, and so that it doesn't get put on the back burner and then things get even worse than they need to. And one of the things I love what you said is using prioritization for your self-care versus motivation. Prioritization versus motivation, and just prioritizing yourself and what you need, and not waiting for that fairy sprinkly dust to come along for that motivation. So powerful. Joanne, I'm sure there's something else that would be helpful for our listener to take away from this discussion over mood changes. I would love to hear what's another pointer that you can share.
And we can't give this kinds of talks and presentations and podcasts without saying, when in doubt, seek help. When in doubt, say it out loud, ask a friend, check in with your primary care physician, because suffering in silence is not okay. We've said that many, many times in this podcast. And again, early recognition and early treatment can make a huge difference. So always seek help if needed.
All right. And with that, I'm going to make sure that I take my vitamin D every day. So important. And those other little daily reminders that can help keep us going in a forward momentum with our mental health. And with that, we hope you stay tuned for our next episode. And if you haven't yet rated or reviewed our podcast, can you take a moment and do that for us? That will help us get our message in front of more women physicians who may need to hear this message and help them get towards improving their moods during this time of year. We look forward to seeing you in the next episode.
Don't miss out on more strategies that will elevate you to new heights. Visit successfulbutstruggling.com now, where you'll discover exclusive resources and the opportunity to connect with each of us individually. There you can dive deeper into how you, too, can take your personal and professional game to the next level. And if you're serious about optimizing your results, take 2 quick steps now. Number 1, connect with us on the website. And number 2, tune in to the next episode.